world, there are some dark prisons reserved only for the most vile criminals, those who have, in cold blood, taken the lives of little innocent souls. Inside these inhumane prisons, the inmates are treated as nothing but trash. From ADX Florence, home to the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer, to La Santé prison, where the infamous Jean-Luc Brunel, an accomplice to Epstein, spent his last living breath. Let's dig into this dark list. Wotton Prison, Nottingham. Europe's largest prison for sex offenders, situated in Nottinghamshire, is HMP Wotton. Built in the 1960s, Wotton can house up to 841 inmates, 70% of whom have committed offences against children, earning the facility the local moniker, the Pedo Palace. HMP Wotton employs a stringent punitive approach to manage misconduct, often resulting in prolonged cell confinement for inmates. Conditions in the B wing are particularly grim, featuring extremely cramped cells, where toilets are uncomfortably close to beds. The walls of these poorly ventilated cells are plagued by black mold, prompting inmates to resort to lining them with cardboard for insulation. Insufficient medication availability further increases the issues, fostering an environment susceptible to bullying and illicit trade, thus jeopardizing safety. While relationships between prisoners and staff generally appear positive, some inmates express feeling disproportionately punished due to the nature of their sexual offenses. The report highlighted a higher incidence of self-harm compared to similar prisons, with insufficient support reported for inmates who engage in self-harming behavior infrequently. Despite lower than average violence levels, the prison frequently has prisoner-on-prisoner assaults as well as assaults on staff. Among the many inmates is Steve, who just recently got convicted after committing a heinous crime against his stepdaughter. He expresses his guilt for the crime and says, "For me personally, this is a hell every single day. We talk about remorse and guilt and the shame for what I've done, not only to my victim, but to my family and to my wider community." Mike, a long-term inmate, reflects on his initial disdain for child sex offenders. He said, "I never liked them. I thought it's the lowest crime you can commit. But when I turned around and took a look at the crime that I've committed, it's against an adult. It doesn't matter. The thought process is still the same." This apparent hostility towards child predators makes this prison a perfectly deserved hellhole for baby killers. ADX Florence, Colorado.
You can't even touch the bars. If you put your hands on the bars, the guard hits you with a baton.
ADX Florence, also known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies and Supermax, is an extreme end of the U.S. federal prison system. Situated in the desolate foothills of the Rocky Mountains near Florence, Colorado, this super maximum security facility is designed with the singular purpose of housing the most dangerous and high-profile criminals deemed unfit for standard prison conditions. Since its inception in 1994, ADX Supermax has housed a formidable population of male inmates. Among them are individuals with a history of chronic disciplinary issues in other prisons, perpetrators of violence resulting in the deaths of fellow inmates or guards, notorious gang leaders, and even terrorists and spies considered threats to national security. The prison's reputation as one of the most secure in the world is well earned and officially recognized by its listing in the Guinness Book of World Records. This fortress-like structure employs competitive security measures both inside and outside its perimeter, creating an environment of absolute control over its inmates. Massive guard towers loom over a 12-foot razor fence, while advanced technologies such as security cameras, laser systems, and pressure pads reinforce its impenetrable defenses. Access for visitors is severely restricted. Inside ADX, inmates are segregated into 6 units based on their criminal histories and behavioral profiles. Inmates typically spend 20 to 24 hours per day confined alone in their cells, measuring a claustrophobic 7 by 12 feet. Solid walls and narrow windows that barely reveal the sky or surroundings reinforce their isolation. Inmates have access to a radio and television for religious, educational, and limited recreational programming. Meals are delivered to their cells, and they are granted occasional brief periods outside for social visits, legal consultations, medical treatments, or supervised recreation. ADX is characterized by extreme sensory deprivation and psychological isolation. Inmates in the most secure units, such as the Special Housing Unit and Control Unit, experience the harshest conditions. They are isolated from all human contact except for interactions with prison staff and often endure extended periods, up to 6 years or more, without meaningful social interaction. Even during recreation time in the solitary outdoor pens, known as empty swimming pools, inmates remain strictly alone. For those under special administrative measures, SAM, stringent controls extend beyond physical confinement to include strict monitoring and censorship of communications, limited visitation rights, and severe restrictions on access to external information or stimuli. Among the notorious list of inmates that this terrifying prison held is the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer. Infamously known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, he was a despicable and depraved serial killer and sex offender. Between 1978 and 1991, he carried out a reign of terror, claiming the lives of 17 young men and engaging in acts of necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts. He lured his victims, some of whom were underage, using deception and false promises, only to subject them to unspeakable horrors. James Edward Dockstader, just 14 years old, fell prey to Dahmer's manipulative tactics when he was lured to his death under the pretext of being paid for nude pictures. Dahmer strangled Dockstader and kept his body in the basement for a week before callously dismembering him and discarding his remains in the trash. His life came to a brutal end when he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate in 1994. La Santé Prison, France. La Santé Prison in Paris is notorious for its inhumane conditions. Inmates often suffer from severe mental health issues, leading some to ingest rat poison, forks, or drain cleaner in desperate acts. Skin diseases are widespread due to limited access to showers, available only twice a week. Despite cell temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, prisoners resort to stuffing their clothes into cell cracks to keep rats at bay, and most mattresses are infested with lice and other insects. The weaker inmates are often turned into slaves by their cellmates, highlighting the brutal environment within the prison. In 1999 alone, 124 inmates committed suicide, giving France one of the highest suicide rates among European penitentiaries. For comparison, California, with a prison population of about 160,000, reported only 24 suicides that same year. One of the most notable prisoners here was the late Jean-Luc Brunel, a French model scout and agency head. He was a disgusting, predatory pedophile. Brunel led Karen Models and founded MC2 Model Management with financing from Jeffrey Epstein. He faced decades-long allegations of sexual assault and misconduct. Coming under intense scrutiny for his ties to Epstein, it was revealed that Brunel actively participated in Epstein's heinous sex trafficking ring, grooming and abusing young females. The French National Police launched an investigation in 2019, and despite Brunel going into hiding, he was arrested in 2020 and charged with the rape of minors. Disgustingly, he avoided facing justice by committing suicide before his trial. In December 2009, a journalist wrote about La Santé prison, imagining the experience of a visitor. Reading the article, a reader named Beth Curtis shared her poignant memories of visiting her brother there, providing a first-hand account of the prison's inhumane conditions. I came across the photo on your blog of an empty packet of cigarettes left on a grey splintered bench outside the Prison de la Santé, and immediately wanted to write to you about the many memories I have of the place. My first memory is of the bench itself, bolted to the curved metal support structure, with the ancient stone wall of the prison as a backrest, and not a hint of greenery in sight. This is the bench that I sat on many times when awaiting entrance to the prison to visit my brother. The prison physician, Véronique Vasseur, revealed the appalling conditions inside: cells infested with rats and lice, rampant suicides, and pervasive depression. Some prisoners, in utter despair, swallowed drain cleaner to escape their suffering. Families and friends of inmates, often from distant places, gathered on the bench, sharing stories and supporting one another. All these horrible details make it a nightmare for baby killers. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. Black Dolphin Prison, situated near the Kazakhstan border, stands as a reminder of Russia's most fearsome penal system, housing some of the country's most violent criminals, including serial killers, cannibals, and terrorists. Built to confine and control individuals deemed irredeemable by society, the prison's architecture and policies reflect a relentless web of security at the cost of basic human dignity. Inmates at Black Dolphin are housed in cells that resemble a cell within a cell concept, a small 50-square-foot enclosure within a larger cell block, secured behind 3 sets of steel doors. This setup not only confines them physically, but also isolates them psychologically, creating an atmosphere of perpetual confinement and surveillance. Their life revolves around a rigid and dehumanizing daily routine. They are awakened promptly at 6 a.m. and are forbidden from sitting on their beds, or whatever it is that they are mercifully granted, for the next 16 hours. Meals consist solely of meager portions of soup and bread, consumed alone in their cells. There is no dining area, depriving inmates of even the most basic social interactions. Inmates are under constant video monitoring, ensuring that every movement and interaction is scrutinized. Guards conduct rounds every 15 minutes, enforcing strict discipline and ensuring compliance through fear and intimidation. Moreover, there are light and motion detectors as well, which further contribute to a sense of constant anxiety. When leaving their cells, inmates are forced to walk bent over at the waist and are blindfolded. This practice aims to disorient inmates and prevent them from familiarizing themselves with the prison layout, thereby minimizing escape attempts and potential violence. Among the row of inmates, there is one notable and disgusting criminal in this prison, Oleg Rylkov, infamously known as the Tolyatti Ripper. He was a despicable and repulsive serial killer, rapist, and pedophile who terrorized the city of Tolyatti, Russia, in the 1990s. Between 1992 and 1997, he carried out a reign of sexual assault and murder that shocked the nation and highlighted the true depths of human depravity. Beginning in 1992, Rylkov targeted young and vulnerable girls, breaking into their apartments and subjecting them to horrific sexual assaults. Over 3 years, he raped an appalling 37 to 39 underage girls, his youngest victim being just 6 years old. However, Rylkov's crimes escalated to murder in 1996 when he brutally killed 7-year-old Ruslan Tkachev. Luring the boy away, he inflicted dozens of stab wounds and then mutilated the body, severing the genitals, ears, tongue, and eyes. The prison's legacy is one of fear and isolation, where child killers are condemned not only to physical incarceration, but also to psychological torment that they very much deserve and more. Kingston Penitentiary, Canada. On April 19th, the federal government announced the impending closure of Kingston Penitentiary, KP, Canada's oldest prison. When the first 5 convicts arrived from Toronto in 1835, they were held at the county jail for 5 days before KP officially opened. By 1835, KP housed 62 inmates, including women, and by 1850, the inmate count swelled to 410, including 24 women and girls in a separate section established in 1839. Accounts from the era show the reality within KP's walls. A commission report from 1849, led by George Brown, later a father of Confederation, revealed shocking details. Antoine Boche, just 8 years old upon his sentencing to KP in 1845, endured 47 lashings in 9 months for minor offences. Similarly, Elizabeth Breen, aged 12, faced 6 floggings. James Brown, after enduring over 1,200 lashes, was declared insane by the prison surgeon. KP's regulations were harsh and strictly enforced. Inmates were prohibited from speaking, gesturing, or making eye contact with each other. Guards maintained a relentless watch from 5 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. during daylight hours and utilized corporal punishment for violations. The prison's punitive measures and austere conditions continued into the modern era. Before it closed down, the infamous prison housed some of the most detestable souls. One among them was Clifford Olson, a despicable and repulsive serial killer who inflicted unimaginable pain and suffering on innocent children and teenagers across Canada in the early 1980s. Between 1980 and 1981, he carried out a string of abductions, rapes, and murders that shocked the nation. Olson, a convicted con artist, first displayed his predatory nature while incarcerated in 1976. Manipulating his cellmate, Gary Francis Marcoux, Olson coaxed a confession out of him and then used that information for his benefit. Chillingly, he later claimed that it was discussions with Marcoux that sparked his sexual interest in children and his murderous intentions. Olson's killing spree began with the abduction and murder of 12-year-old Christine Weller in November 1980. Over the following months, he brutally took the lives of Colleen Marion Daigneault, Darren Todd Johnsrud, Sandra Wolfsteiner, and Ada Anita Court, all between the ages of 13 and 16. These innocent victims were subjected to unspeakable acts of violence, with their bodies often found months after their abduction, bearing the marks of strangulation and stab wounds. July 1981 marked a particularly dark period. determined as Olsen escalated his murderous rampage. Within a mere matter of weeks, he claimed the lives of 6 more young individuals. Simon Partington, aged 9, Judy Cosma, 14, Raymond King II, 15, Sigrun Arndt, 18, Terry Lynn Carson, 15, and Louise Chartrand, 17. These victims were abducted, raped, strangled, and bludgeoned, their bodies discarded like trash. With its history of torture, child predators are sure to suffer the pain of a lifetime in this prison. Klong Prem Central Prison, Thailand. Klong Prem Prison, nestled in Thailand, confines 6,267 inmates, many serving sentences ranging from 15 years to life. The conditions within this notorious facility paint a stark picture of overcrowding and harsh realities. The cells themselves are an add-on to these conditions. Each measures a mere 1.5 x 3 meters, yet they are expected to accommodate 5 inmates. This overcrowding means that inmates sleep side by side on dark blue mattresses laid out directly on the floor, leaving little space for personal privacy. For larger prisoners and foreigners, fitting into such cramped quarters becomes not just uncomfortable, but physically restrictive, adding to the overall sense of confinement and claustrophobia. Beyond the physical constraints, the psychological toll on inmates is immense. Many are serving long sentences, often ranging from 15 years to life, predominantly for drug-related offenses. The severity of these sentences reflects Thailand's uncompromising stance on drug crimes, where even minor offenders can find themselves locked away for years. Punishment within Klong Prem extends beyond confinement to include torture. Reports indicate instances of abuse and mistreatment by guards. For those who have experienced the justice system's wrath, such as lengthy solitary confinement, physical punishment, or even the use of restraints, the prison environment becomes not just punitive, but torturous. Inmates endure deplorable conditions, lacking adequate access to healthcare, sanitation, and meaningful rehabilitation programs. The focus remains squarely on containment. One of the most notable child predators that this facility held was Gingao Lorsungneon. She was a Thai woman who carried out a heinous and repulsive act of kidnapping and conspiracy that led to the tragic death of a 6-year-old boy. Her actions, driven by financial desperation, resulted in a young life being cut short and caused unimaginable pain to the victim's family. Lorsungneon, who had previously worked as a housekeeper for the Srijaryon Sukying family, found herself in need of money after being fired from her job. In a twisted and despicable plot, she conspired with her 28-year-old boyfriend, a criminal, and 4 other individuals to kidnap the Srijaryon Sukying's young son for a ransom of 200,000 baht. They provided instructions for a nighttime drop-off. However, the desperate parents failed to locate the designated spot, and their failure to pay had tragic consequences. The kidnappers stabbed the boy and then buried him alive. The Thai authorities rightly identified her as one of the key players in this heinous plot, and she was subsequently arrested and convicted. Justice was served with Lorsungneon's execution in 1979.
And I remember going into the cell and it was just shocking with Thai inmates. There was about 80 inmates in the cell and it was like a tin of sardines. There was no space whatsoever.
This facility, overwhelmed by its population, where basic human rights are routinely violated and the prospect of rehabilitation remains elusive, is a nightmare for child predators. Dooley State Prison, Georgia. Dooley State Prison, situated in Unadilla, Georgia, has earned a notorious reputation within the Georgia Department of Corrections. This medium-security facility, primarily designated for sex offenders, has been marred by a litany of controversies that have shaken its foundations. Shortly after its establishment, Dooley State Prison became embroiled in many scandals that reflected its horrible living conditions. In 1996, 11 inmates filed a lawsuit against Dooley State Prison, alleging that guards subjected them to sadistic and degrading abuse. Despite their claims, the Federal Appeals Court in Atlanta dismissed the lawsuit in an 8-4 ruling, citing the Prison Litigation Reform Act. This law requires prisoners to demonstrate physical injury before seeking federal action for mental or emotional harm suffered while incarcerated. Then, in February 2014, Mitchell Lavon Ludi, serving a life sentence for murder, filed a lawsuit against the prison for denying him kosher food during Passover. Ludi, who identified as Jewish, claimed claimed religious persecution and emotional distress due to being unable to observe the holiday. Prison officials argued that kosher food was not provided in his housing area, despite Ludi's prior requests and awareness of Muslim inmates being accommodated for Ramadan. Initially seeking $16 million, Ludi settled the case for $200 in May 2016. Later, in February 2016, Dooley State Prison was implicated in an FBI sting operation along with 8 other Georgia state prisons. The operation resulted in the indictment of 46 correctional officers, including 10 from Dooley, for smuggling contraband such as cell phones, weapons, and drugs into the prison, highlighting systemic corruption within the facility. This twisted system makes this prison a ride through hell for baby killers. Attica Correctional Facility, USA. Attica Correctional Facility, located in Attica, New York, was among the last major penitentiaries constructed in the United States, completed in 1931 at great expense. Built in response to serious inmate unrest in the late 1920s, including riots at other state prisons, its formidable design featured a 2-foot-thick wall, towering 30 feet high with numerous guard towers. The prison was intended to provide secure, modern facilities to address ongoing issues with inmate management. Conditions within Attica are severe and dehumanizing. Inmates endured confinement for at least 14 hours daily in cramped cells, subsisted on poor quality food, and received inadequate medical care and minimal recreational opportunities. During the 1960s and 1970s, Attica housed predominantly impoverished men from New York cities, with an estimated 2/3 being Hispanic or African American. In contrast, the predominantly white corrections officers, recruited from rural New York communities, often struggled to manage the diverse inmate population. The prison administration prohibited political organizations and showed particular hostility towards black Muslims, denying them the right to hold religious services. These policies, alongside cultural tensions, created a pervasive sense of unrest among inmates. In September 1971, tensions erupted into a riot following an altercation between inmates and correctional officers attempting to discipline them. The uprising saw inmates take control of cell blocks, seize hostages, and negotiate with prison authorities. After failed negotiations, Commissioner of Correctional Services Russell Oswald, with Governor Nelson Rockefeller's approval, ordered state troopers to retake the prison forcefully on September 13th. The assault resulted in the deaths of 29 inmates and 10 hostages, with many others injured. One of the most famous inmates in the prison was Aaron Key, infamously known as the East Harlem Rapist. He was a despicable and depraved serial killer and rapist who terrorized the streets of Manhattan, New York City in the 1990s. His heinous crimes, committed against vulnerable teenage girls, showcase the true depths of human depravity and the destructive nature of sexual predation. Key's murderous spree began when he was just 17 years old. On January 24, 1991, he brutally raped, stabbed, and strangled 13-year-old Paula Hilera, ending her young life in an act of horrifying violence. This disturbing act marked the beginning of a pattern of predatory behavior that would span several years. Over the next 7 years, Key stalked and preyed on lone women, following them to secluded areas where he could satisfy his twisted sexual desires. He is confirmed to have committed at least 4 rapes and is responsible for the deaths of 3 young girls, all in the East Harlem neighborhood. The exact details of these attacks remain unknown, but the fact that they occurred over such an extended period highlights Key's ability to evade capture. Before the 1971 uprising, the prisoners wrote their first-hand accounts of abuse in the Attica Manifesto, saying, "The Attica Prison Hospital is totally inadequate, understaffed, and prejudiced in the treatment of inmates. There are numerous mistakes made many times, improper and erroneous medication is given by untrained personnel. Child killers are sure to cry in agony in this prison." Butyrka Prison, Moscow. One of Russia's most infamous prisons, known for housing Adolf Hitler's nephew and writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, is Butyrka. It is an imposing red brick jail located in central Moscow, currently operating as a pre-trial detention center, accommodating around 2,000 inmates. Reports from inmates frequently cited poor conditions, inadequate lighting, limited exercise opportunities, and substandard medical care. Sergei Magnitsky's case in 2009 exemplified Butyrka's grim reputation. He suffered from pancreatitis and gallstones while incarcerated, enduring repeated denials of medical treatment. His condition deteriorated as he was moved from one cell to another, each worse than the last, amidst pressure to change his testimony. Tragically, Magnitsky succumbed to his untreated illnesses. Among its inmates, one notable one is Sergei Golovkin, infamously known as the Boa. He was a despicable and depraved serial killer, rapist, and necrophile who preyed on young boys in the Moscow area between 1986 and 1992. Golovkin, born in 1959, embarked on a murderous spree that targeted boys between the ages of 10 and 16. Over a 6-year period, he tortured, raped, and killed 11 innocent victims, satisfying his twisted sexual desires and inflicting unimaginable pain and suffering on his young prey. The details of these attacks are disturbing, as Golovkin lured his victims to his garage basement or secluded forests outside Moscow, where he could act on his dark impulses without fear of discovery. The true extent of Golovkin's atrocities is difficult to fathom, but the fact that he earned the nickname the Boa indicates the terrifying nature of his crimes. It is believed that he strangled his victims, mirroring the constriction of a boa constrictor snake, before engaging in necrophilic acts. A former Byutrika inmate named Roman Popkov says they throw people there with a single aim: to break them, to sap their health. Butyrka has become synonymous with the harsh realities of the Russian prison system and a nightmare for child predators. HM Prison Barwon, Australia. Barwon Prison, located outside Melbourne, Australia, has gained a reputation for its challenging living conditions and high security measures. The prison is divided into several separate units, each serving a specific purpose and housing different categories of prisoners. The Acacia unit, for instance, is a high security management unit accommodating high-risk prisoners, while Banksia is for those requiring close supervision or protection. The Hoya unit is specifically for prisoners who, due to the nature of their crimes, require protection from mainstream prisoners. Inmates at Barwon face a highly regimented daily routine with limited freedoms. They wake up early, fold their thin blankets, and are counted by guards. Group showers involve using bowls to scoop water from a large basin for washing. Meals consist of low-grade rice or porridge with soup, and most inmates rely on food sent by their families or cook for themselves with limited supplies. The prison also utilizes a house system, where inmates from the same province or community stick together, leading to a power dynamic that the prison authorities try to prevent. Barwon has been the site of several notable incidents, including the murder of convicted gangland murderer Carl Williams, who was beaten to death by fellow prisoner Matthew Johnson in 2010. The prison is also infamous for inmate attacks on officers, poor waste management, and overcrowding. In 2015, several prison officers were injured in an unprovoked attack by 2 prisoners in the Grevelaya unit. The living conditions at Barwon Prison are harsh and often dehumanizing, with a focus on security and control rather than rehabilitation. Inmates face limited access to resources, strict regulations, and constant surveillance. Among the inmates is John Miles Sharp, an Australian man who committed a heinous and repulsive act of triple murder, taking the lives of his pregnant wife, Anna Marie Kemp, and their 20-month-old daughter, Gracie Louise Kemp. He repeatedly fired a spear gun into the heads of his victims. In a twisted attempt to conceal his crimes, Sharp exhumed his wife's body from a shallow grave, dismembered her remains, and disposed of them in a landfill. Adding to the horror, this psychopath then appeared in emotional interviews on television, feigning concern and seeking information on his family's whereabouts. This disturbing performance showcased the true depths of his depravity and the extent of his manipulative nature. It was only later that he confessed to the murders, bringing a sense of closure to the devastated community. For his unforgivable crimes, Sharp was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment, with a non-parole period of 33 years. To watch more such interesting videos, click on one of the cards on your screen.